don't shoot the messenger. And that is the admonition that I'm going to invoke right off the top of this episode of The Big Middle, because the messenger is my guest, Jayne Buxton. She's a journalist. She's an author of a great new book. It's called The Great Plant-Based Con: Why Eating a Plants-Only Diet Won't Improve Your Health or, much as you've been told otherwise, save the planet. Would it be fair to say, Jayne, that you have been shot many times? You've been tarred, feathered, and trolled endlessly since you brought your book out. Tell us how it's been.
Well, that is true. That's partially what the experience has been like. And somebody on Twitter likened the treatment of me to the stoning of a heretic. And so that was interesting. But I have to say that that hasn't been the entirety of the experience. There's been a lot of positive response to the book as well. A lot of people seem to have been waiting for somebody to open up this discussion and to bring a new narrative to the table, because it's been far too one-sided for far too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, why did you decide 3.5 years ago to, not just gingerly step on what is the equivalent of the third rail when it comes to the nutrition wars? I mean, you're stomping on it.
Yeah, kicking the hornet's nest, really, isn't it? That's what somebody else described it as. Why did I decide to do that? Well, I gradually decided to do it. So initially, I was just struck in 2019 by the how much the message in favor of plant-based diets had become so much louder. It was more ubiquitous. It was everywhere you looked. It was every time you opened the newspaper. And I started to notice they were using false statistics as well, very much contrary to the statistics as I understood them, the facts as I understood them. And so I started to do research for myself, really, and for my own family and for my own benefit, not really knowing what I was going to do with it. And then the movie Game Changers came out. And I think we may talk about this a little bit later if you'd like, but that really was a tipping point for me, understanding just how much the debate had been skewed and how much misinformation was being conveyed in that film. So I thought, no, it's time to write something in response. It's time to write a book that really tips the scales a bit and opens the debate up and gives people more information to make better decisions for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need that balancing out of the messaging, because the vegan message, plant-based, all of that, it has, as you may have said already, it's become irrefutable fact. Every single article that you read, it says, well, as we all know, we have to
Yeah.
stop eating meat. Well, as you know already, you must stop eating meat. And as we know, the cows burping, the thirsty cows, creating all these
Yeah.
issues is adding to our legacy load of pollution. But before we get into all the layers and the drivers of the messaging, I want to get the terminology straight with you, because plant-based seems to be open to a lot of interpretation. So I want to lay the table, if you will. What do you mean by plant-based?
When I say plant-based, I mean mostly or only plants. Um, and I make that distinction in the book because it's possible to eat lots of plants and to build them in and to aim to eat a wide variety, which I'm all in favor of. And I think that's terrific. If you can tolerate plants, eat all that you can. Um, but I am arguing really against the healthfulness of a plants only diet. But it's amazing how the word is used very indiscriminately these days. And it's actually impossible to know what most people mean by plant-based. So when the UN says we need to go more plant-based, what do they mean? Have 5 a day in with your other foods, eat a little less meat and a lot more plants. What do they mean? And the survey that I cite in the book made it very clear that people who are asked this question have a whole range of definitions for plant-based, and some of them think it just means eating one piece of one vegetable in and amongst all of their animal source foods. So it really is very important. I do think that one word it is a word that has become overused, And the vegan word has become loosely used as well. So I was listening to an actress who was describing in an interview that she was mostly vegan. Now, I've never known that it was possible to be mostly vegan. You either are or you aren't in my book. You either don't eat animal foods or you do. And I wonder if that was her way of just softening the blow and putting herself in with the right crowd and virtue signaling, when really what she meant was she ate quite a lot of vegetables and only small amounts of fish and meat. I don't know what she meant. So it's a real minefield. But when I argue against the healthfulness of a plant-based diet, I'm talking about plants only. I'm talking about plants only or very, very minimal amounts of animal foods.
Yeah, it's really along a really broad spectrum, isn't it? What you
Yeah.
hear, what you read about in the media, because we're going to be looking at all of that. Now, this is your book. It is a doorstopper of a book. 522 pages of rigorous research. And I mean, the cast of characters, it's all of the leading scientists, nutritionists, and there is so much balance in your messaging, which I really appreciate because I am the audience. I really am. I've been headlong into all of the research trying to come to my own conclusions. And you say that you wrote it for the confused middle. How did we become so confused and conflicted about what constitutes a healthy diet? It's no accident if we go way back in history and you tell us, you start to connect the dots for us. Ellen G. White, and then maybe work in a couple of lines about Ansel Keys and how we got to now, Eat Lancet, the Great
Yeah.
Reset. I know it's a tall order, almost an impossible ask, but can you take us back
It
to the
is. So forgive me if
1800s?
I meander, but I always like to start with Ansel Keys as being a pivotal point in our confusion. And I will cover further back, but I'd like to tie it in to what we can talk about Ansel Keys. His two basic studies, the 6-country study and the 7-country study back in the 50s, really had the effect of vilifying saturated fat, which I think really lies at the root of our fear of animal source foods. It lies at the heart of all the arguments against animal source foods, against eating meat. And it's always thrown in our faces if we ever try to argue for the healthfulness of meat eating. So those studies, which really were, for want of a better word, cherry picking the evidence at the time to show a really strong correlation or association between saturated fat intake and heart disease, it turned out that wasn't such a rigorous way of looking at it, and that there were that those examples that Keys used were cherry picked for good reason in his books, and that other people were able to find evidence to the contrary. And when I say evidence to the contrary, that started with your Shulamy and Hilbo at the very time in 1957, who demonstrated that the association did not hold true across 22 countries. And it's gone all the way through to people like Dr. Zoe Harcum, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who have done similar analyses showing that the saturated fat heart disease link does not hold true. The other impact, though, of that Ansel Keys approach was that it kind of set in stone a way of looking at problems, nutritional epidemiology, which exists today, which has been institutionalized today. And there is a whole industry around epidemiology, which are these associational studies which purport to tell us really important things about what individual foods are doing to our bodies, but really tell us very little at all because they're only associational and they're very small risk factors.
And
So
most are done via questionnaires. What did
most
you eat
are,
last Wednesday? In what quantities? And, did you have 3 packs of cigarettes? No, that's not asked or
or
answered.
what did you eat last year? It even gets as ridiculous as that. And we know that those food frequency questionnaires, which are the basis of all nutritional epidemiology, without exception, they are 50 to 60% accurate at most. And this is always admitted in papers and then brushed aside. So that was the very, very long lasting impact of Keys and how we became confused, because we are now regularly confused probably every other day by one of these studies that comes out and tells us that animal foods are bad, plants are good.
Yeah, and it's never in the articles that say, as we already know, you must, it's giving the plant message only. You never find that there's the history or a link to the history. It's just, as you say, incontrovertible fact. That's how it's grown through the
Yeah,
media messaging, which we'll look at later as well. And
yeah,
John Yudkin, the British, was he a pathologist or physiologist? And he wrote Pure, White, and Deadly.
that's
And
right.
he was saying it's all to do with the sugar, carbohydrate insulin model, as opposed to saturated fat is all bad and the demonization
Yeah.
of fat. So anyway, back to you. Ansel
He was
Keys, and
ahead of
if you
his
can,
time, though, wasn't he? He was ahead of his time, and he got sidelined. His research got sidelined, as did the research of George Mann.
yeah.
Um, and George Mann said that he felt that the diet heart hypothesis, which was Key's hypothesis about saturated fat, was the biggest in medical history. Scam, I should say, in medical history. So, yeah, I think we were shortchanged. But then what really happened was that thought process and that antipathy to saturated fat got embedded in the guidelines from 1980 onwards, after the McGovern Commission did its work to try and understand where heart disease was coming from. And ever since then, the guidelines have had this bias against saturated fat, which we can't shift. And one of the reasons that bias has persisted in the guidelines process in North America, which then spills over to other countries, has to do with another of the root causes of this confusion, as it were, which I think is the influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah.
And I'll explain what I mean by that. Seventh-day Adventist Church, founded by Ellen G. White, 1863, is founded on the very belief that the Garden of Eden diet was prescribed by God. And that is a, vegetables, fruits, and nuts diet. It has no meat in it. And meat is believed in that religion to be sinful and to cause lustful, impure thoughts and worse. So this belief system, you would think some of your audience might be thinking, well, so what? That's a religion. We've got lots of religions that believe in lots of things. So, but the difference with the Seventh-day Adventist Church is they managed to exert influence over the dietary guidelines process and over dietitians via somebody called Lena Cooper. She was one of the first. She was a protege of John Harvey Kellogg, and she founded the Dietitians Association of America. She wrote the textbook that was used from 1920 onwards, I believe. And proteges of hers and followers of the Seventh-day Adventist belief system worked their way into the dietary advisory committees and the guidelines. And so they today are influencing what we think about animal source foods versus plant-based.
I mean, the affiliations and the connections and the paid for, the funded studies, all
Mm.
of these links. I mean, it's a web of deceit and deception that I find is absolutely astonishing. I know Nina Teicholz has done a lot of work on this. With her, she's got
Yeah.
a fascinating book, and I love how you pay homage to all of these. You summarize their books, and you've really done, as I said, rigorous journalism to pull all of this together. And you also, was it Gary Fettke that talked about prophets, the religious side, prophets and prophets?
Prophets and Prophets, him
Yeah.
and Belinda Fettke. Yeah. So, and this again speaks to the incredibly current nature of the Seventh-day Adventist influence, because Gary Fettke was a doctor he was an orthopedic surgeon, is an orthopedic surgeon in Tasmania, who became convinced that he could help diabetic patients to avoid these terrible amputations, which he was having to do, and that they should be advised on diet. They should have a low sugar diet. And he started to preach, for want of a better word, about that in hospitals. And he started to agitate for a better diet. And this caught the attention of the Dietitians Association of Australia. Somebody reported him to AFRA, which is their governing body for medical professionals. And he faced a 4-year ordeal where he was threatened with losing his license simply for advocating for low sugar diets for diabetics and obese patients. Now, Belinda Fettke, his wife, uncovered a whole web of connections and a sort of collusive movement between the dietitians, the cereal companies, and Sanitarium, which is one cereal company, which is wholly owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And all of these groups had attempted to silence Gary. And again, he was exonerated eventually after a 4-year trial. But that was only 3 years ago. So again,
I mean, shades of Prof. Tim Noakes in South Africa as well.
absolutely, and it was all
bullying, mobbing.
Yeah, all happening at the same time. Both of them became exonerated about the same time, but at great personal cost to themselves.
But the evidence exonerated them, and I know Dr. Zoe Harcombe, she had a role in all of that, and some of the many others that are presented in your book. But that an email and Prof. Noakes and Gary Fettke could be vilified and mobbed and bullied for telling the truth.
Yeah.
Is just incredible. But it shows you the power of these affiliations, and one email here and one letter there, and for ideological vegans and vegetarians who may have nefarious purposes and are only looking at the profit side of the picture, because as we know, and as you'll no doubt help us understand, the profit side of the picture, that's where the market can grow. Cheaply made products made of plants can be sold at a premium eventually by all of these makers of, they've kind of run out of room on the cereal front. I mean, what more can they do to a box of cornflakes?
Right. Now they've got a whole new big opportunity opened up. Absolutely. Which enables them to stick a planet-friendly, vegan, you name it. They can stick any old label on it that they want and charge a premium, and they do charge a premium.
Well, I love how you wrote when you were relating the story of the Fetkes, that the Seventh-day Adventist messaging is still being pulled through this vast web of affiliations, all wrapped up, you wrote, in a lifestyle medicine cloak embellished with Save the Planet embroidery.
Yeah.
And as you quite rightly pointed out at the end of one of your chapters, we all need to know where this messaging is coming from. And it's coming at such an astonishing pace, and it's so much louder than the regenerative farming message, and such a repudiation of nature. So I want to get into some of that. I mean, let's look at the media then before we go to Eat Lancet, because the media has been monstrous in its sloppiness with some of its clickbait headlines. There was one, I did write it in my notes, but I can't really pull it up at the time, something about vegans are munching their way to longer lives, and if you continue to eat meat, you're going to an early grave. Tell us about that one as one of many that you included on.
It is one of many. In fact, I could probably pull a study like that up almost every day, where the media headline has exaggerated what is in fact the conclusion of the paper, which in itself has exaggerated the conclusions that the data should lead us to. So there are two layers of exaggeration going on. And I think the one you're talking about, if I'm correct, and I have it, I think it was a study by Yangbo's son and colleagues, Association of Major Protein Sources with All-Cause and Cause-Specific Mortality. And the way that study was reported was that vegans had a 50% chance of living longer. And there were variations on that in the different newspapers, time to ditch the meat, high protein vegan diet can slash the risk of an early death by 50%. When I looked at the data for that, aside from the fact that it suffered from all the usual flaws of epidemiology, the food frequency questionnaires, which are inaccurate, the multiple confounders, what I noticed was that all of the hazard ratios or the relative risk factors, which were supposed to be associated with eating, say, eggs or dairy or meat, were tiny. I couldn't find this 50% number anywhere. I couldn't find the number 50% anywhere in the entire paper. And I wrote to the author and I asked him, are these headlines based on your paper? And he wrote back categorically and said, no, those headlines are not based on anything in my paper. So now, does that mean that the media lied? No, I think that the media added a few things up, did a little bit jiggery pokery with some of the numbers in there, and came up with what was pretty spectacular headline. And
Yeah, I mean the head.
and
Yeah, I mean the headline. I remember. I've got it now. It said vegans are full of beans in later years, and talking
yes,
about how, as you said, vegan lifestyle would cut your risk of an early grave by 50%. But we both know. I've worked in the media for a number of years, and all of my favored sources of mainstream media are implicated in all of this.
yeah,
BBC, my alma mater, The Guardian, Channel 4, I was shocked, has been bankrolled and supported by some strictly vegan ideological organizations and not done some balanced programming. So, and it doesn't surprise me how these headlines happen because, as we know, the media is going through its own slow death, print media especially, scorched earth. And we know
mhm,
that things happen at speed in newsrooms. You might get a slick press release and, okay, we've decided there's something in this. Somebody go whip up a story about this based on. They don't do the deep digging because they've only got 4 hours to pull it all together. And then it's handed over to a copy editor or headline writer. And they're just going, okay, click, click, click. My bonus rests on getting the best headline going, or just the life of the paper. So I want to pull people in.
that's exactly how it works. And sometimes they'll be working just from a press release and they'll never look at the original paper. So that whole idea of investigating these things has gone out the window. There just isn't time.
Yeah, there's no
And
time. And there wasn't even time when I first started in the media. I did political reporting in Canada, and why I hated it so much is you'd get a white paper. And would you have any time before you did your piece to camera and, pulled together all the facts and made a nice, lovely, compelling report? There is no time to make a phone call. And
yeah,
even if you did make a phone call, it would be exactly what the government's line was
yeah,
and would, poo-poo the opposition line. It just felt like smoke and mirrors then. And that
yeah,
was what,
yeah,
40 years ago. So it's even worse now
that's
as
right.
all manner of media forms try to survive with the onslaught of us podcasters.
Yeah, and then there is a couple of more mysterious ones. So you talk about headline writers, and they're just looking for a way to get you to pay attention, right? There was one which I also talk about in the book where it said, "If you want to live a long life, eat your greens." And so I read that. Even within the article itself, they noted that it wasn't just eating your greens. You had the people who had lived longer or showed signs of living longer were eating eggs, liver, and fish 3 times a week each.
But
Or
it was only the
times a week.
greens that was pulled up
But it's only
as
the
worthy of a
greens.
mention.
So what is going on in people's heads that that is deemed the most attractive? This is all part of the conditioning we've had over decades, which says plants are good, animal foods are bad. It's just conditioning that leads a headline writer, a copy writer at a newspaper to go, okay, the greens. We're going to go for the greens.
Well, there's the messaging is just lost in the dust, lost in the depleted soil, let's say, the
Yes.
messaging on the other side of it. And
Yeah.
and I just want to state as well, you and I are both omnivores.
Yeah.
Anyone who's a long time listener knows I won't tell my whole story now, but I was a sloppy vegetarian for a number of years. But all through
Mhm.
my teen years, I was very much a victim of the Ansel Keys thinking because my mother, she was so health conscious. She read her Reader's Digest articles and Family Circle and Good Housekeeping, and she was always out there with her rice cake and her wedge of apple and a couple of nuts, having her little grazing meals throughout the day. So I was very much someone who I had no fat in my diet whatsoever. Not even olive oil at the time because the Mediterranean diet wasn't, all the rage then.
Mhm.
So even healthy fats were not allowed. So I was zero fat pretty much through my teens, my 20s, and then I was a very sloppy vegetarian, having a plate of spinach and broccoli and not really supplementing or doing anything like that. So now I am reluctantly, because it's all about the animal welfare, I'm an omnivore because I need the nutrient density for some of the things that happened, autoimmune attacks. I'm getting tired of my own story. Autoimmune attacks at menopause and all of that. But that's me in a nutshell. So I'm just trying to find the best way forward, and I think all of my friends are as well. And you too, as well, because you said you look down at your plate and it's mostly vegetables, but you
Yeah,
also eat meat.
that's right. I eat small amounts of meat, probably half the portion that my son and my husband would have, or my girls. Um, and for much of my life, I was the girl who went to the Outback Steakhouse and had a baked potato and a salad because I loved that. I loved
Yeah.
it, and I also was victim to that whole low fat thing that you're talking about. So it'd be low fat sour cream and all of that. And it wasn't until I kind of woke up, thanks to my sister, nutritionally, probably 8, 9 years ago, that I started to realize that I needed that nutrient density as well. Particularly as we get older, we need the protein, we need quality protein. And there is absolutely no way on this earth that the plant proteins are as high quality as animal proteins.
Well, this is the thing, and you go into great detail, and I'm so appreciative of it. I mean, how much rice, beans, and lentils would you have to eat? You'd have to eat such a heavy load
Absolutely.
calorifically and in terms of carbohydrates, which would send your blood sugar skyrocketing. I mean, take us through some of
So,
the
like,
nutrition
say you
findings.
wanted to get 25 grams of protein, which would be about half what someone like I need in a day. Um, you could get that by eating 4 ounces of steak, 100 grams of steak, and for a calorie cost of approximately 150 to 200 calories. Or you could eat, I think it's 3 cups of cooked beans at a cost of 600 calories. Okay. Now, it doesn't take long for that to add up if that's where you're getting all your protein. You can see why the calorie load and the carbohydrate load is so high when you're trying to get your protein in conjunction with these carb rich plants. And not only that, but that excessive amount of beans is not even complete protein because it doesn't have all the amino acids in the right combinations. So to get it to be complete protein all in that meal, you'd have to either combine it with rice or you'd have to eat, triple the amount. So whatever way you look at it, you're eating piles and piles of very carby plants when you're trying to get your protein,
And then you add some more plants, the spinach, which we now know, full
right?
of oxalates.
You
I
get
used to eat
oxalates, yeah.
massive plates of spinach. I mean, that
Yeah,
used to be my thing. I lived in Lyon at the time, and I would look at
yeah,
all my friends and feel oh so superior because they were having steak tartare and I was having my assiette d'épinards. And honest to goodness, I would feel virtuous.
yes, I
I
bet
mean,
you
I
did.
literally
Yeah,
thought, I'm not killing any animals
yeah.
just so I can survive. And I thought they were horrible for all doing it. But, now I'm more educated and I see that, yes, postmenopause, I need more protein and I'm not going to get it from lentils and rice and beans.
That's right. And I think it is about survival. Um, and I was struck by an interview you did with Ben Bittman, the great insulin master. And
Yes.
he said a purely vegan diet is incompatible with human life, human survival. And he said, I really mean that. And he's not a man to say things loosely or for effect or whatever. He really means it. And then he went on to describe just how important it was, particularly for pregnant women, to get the B12 and the quality protein, and in order to divide the cells for their babies, etc. So the mechanisms are very, very clear. Now, does that mean nobody can survive on a vegan diet? No. There are some people who seem to manage for a period of time or even a very long time. And I think there are a number of theories about the genetic differences in those people that make them able to do it. They can metabolize vitamin A a lot better from the vegetables, which many of us can't. They have less need for, say, choline. They can metabolize K2 better. So there are a whole bunch of, or they have a better tolerance for those gastro challenging beans and rice combinations.
Well, that's the other important bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you eat those, 6 cups of beans and
Yeah.
the rice and you throw in some spinach, maybe, do an ottolenghi and put some pomegranate on it and beautiful
Yes.
pistachios, you're going to have some gastric distress. You're going to
Yeah.
be bloated. You may have some gut dysbiosis. You can set yourself up for the autoimmune attack that I had after
Mhm.
10 plus years of, being ever so healthy and having all those combinations that were hard on my digestive system.
Yeah. And it hits some people suddenly. So you can go along for a period of time and maybe feel absolutely fine, then it hits you. Yeah.
Well, it's like Prof. Bickman said. He said the bill comes due.
That feels.
And Prof. Tim Noakes said the same thing.
Mhm.
If you're a high performing athlete, because he's all about, peak performance, and it was carb cycling, carb loading for so many years before
Yeah.
he saw the light and said, look, I've got diabetes because of my carb loading, even though I'm
Yeah.
running marathons every 10 minutes. There's just a lot more to it. And as you quite rightly say, it's all about the individual now. We're learning we are not all the same. We're not just discombobulated systems. We have to look at ourselves as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I got challenged by Dr. Sean Baker the other day. Some of your listeners will know he's a carnivore advocate for health reasons, for no other reason than that. And we were talking about what enables some people to eat a vegan diet successfully or not. And I said, well, some people are lucky because they can metabolize vitamin A better or whatever. And he stopped me and he said, I don't think they're lucky. I think they're very unlucky because the bill is going to come. He said they'll go along and they may be able to metabolize that stuff for a while, but the bill is going to come. And I see a lot of patients in their 50s who are now suffering, and it's almost too late, right? So he corrected me there, and it's another way of looking at it. You're not that lucky if you get away with it for a while.
No, and it's like I have some friends visiting from France. As an old pal of mine, 50-year-old guy, and he's brought his 19-year-old daughter along. And I said to her, "So, what's your view on? Are you a vegan?" She goes, "Oh yes, of course, yes, I'm a vegan."
Of
She's
course.
19, and it was the way she said it with such conviction. "Oh yeah, yeah." And I said, "Well, listen, I've become an omnivore." And we got into it, and I wasn't, proselytizing or trying to shove my viewpoints down, but I told her about your book, and I said it might be good once we do this podcast if you have a little listen. She goes, "Oh no, no, I could never eat an animal."
Mm.
And again, she's 19, so the Greta Thunbergs of the world and all of the messaging that's come through, this is the cohort that's really taken it on board, as I did with the Ansel Keys no saturated fat messaging. I mean, I literally went around with a ridiculously misplaced superior attitude for much of my teens and 20s and even into my 30s, thinking I was so virtuous because I was being abstemious and I wasn't eating animals because isn't it awful how they're factory processed and abused and
And none of
dishonored.
that, and that is true, by the way. So I think when that friend of yours says, I could never eat an animal, I understand where that feeling comes from. And I do have a lot of respect for vegans who will say, I know that this is not good for my health, or it's not the best thing for my health, but I'm willing to make the sacrifice because I feel so strongly about not eating animals that have been treated in this way. And we who have allowed industrial farming to become the norm in many places, and particularly when it comes to chicken and pig farming, um, we really have to admit that veganism has grown on the back of that. Veganism as it is today is a response to that. And therefore, there are changes that we really do need to make in the way we farm, in the way we care for animals, in order to enable us to make that terrible paradoxical compromise, which is we need those nutrients, but we don't want to mistreat the animals in order to get them.
Well, you've dedicated your book to the farmers, your
Yeah.
dedication to the farmers around the world who will take us toward a sustainable, real food future. But at this late day, late stage of the game, when going vegan, plant-based has become the dominant message out there, how are we going to get people to that place where the quality of the soil, where we get microbes back in the soil, and ruminants are the only ones who can do that, and we need to, take them out of the feedlots. I mean, how do we get this happening? Because governments aren't as one doing it. They're talking about eat Lancet, forget about all meat, have a tablespoon of meat a month and go for the nuts. The
Yeah.
avocados that take, I learned from your book, The Astonishing Fact. Sorry, I'm melding a lot in here, but I learned the
Yeah.
astonishing fact that one, well, you tell us, one almond requires how much water to
It was
create one almond?
158 liters, I believe, of water. Oh, no, 25 liters of water for one almond. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So then you add it up. If you think about what a handful of almonds is, it's a lot. Takes a lot more water than a handful of beef. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, I'm going to be embarrassed to buy almonds now.
I think that there are good ways and bad ways, and there are environmentally friendly ways and environmentally detrimental ways of growing every food, whether it be the almonds, the avocados, or the beef. And I know that some farmers are experimenting with different ways of catching the almonds and when they come to the ground so they can save on the water use and things like that. So there are things that can be done, and in particular, there are things that can be done to make beef a contributor to climate health rather than any sort of detriment. Because what I'm not arguing that meat eating has no environmental impact at all. It clearly does. Every food has an environmental impact. What I am arguing is that the extent of that impact in emissions terms, in methane terms, has been wildly exaggerated. And we can get into what I mean by that.
Well, I want you to get into that because I was astonished. I mean, you said in the UK it's only what, 6%? And in articles and in the Game Changers, the documentary, James Cameron's documentary with Arnold Schwarzenegger and
Yeah.
a cast of characters that all of the younger people watched and went, I'm not eating animals after this.
Yeah.
I mean, you quite rightly say there it was, what was it? And Greta Thunberg as well holds up the signs, 51% of
51%.
emissions are from cows.
That's right. Well, originally, the first citation of 51% came from Cowspiracy, which is in 2014 or 15. And even though the producers of that documentary had to retract that number and go back to using the then accepted number of 14.5%, and I remember the producers saying, "Oh, who cares? It's a lot." And he
But
didn't.
that's the global as well, isn't
And
it?
that's global. So as you say, that 51% number remains in the consciousness of many people, mostly young people who have it on their placards when they're protesting it, and you can't seem to shift that. That is the global number. Now, but even the correct global number is an exaggeration of what is actually happening. Now, there are a couple of technical reasons why this is true. One is that the 14.5% number globally for livestock is a life cycle number. No other sector has the life cycle number. So what life cycle means, everything that goes into that beef when it comes to get it to your table. Cars aren't a life cycle number. They're just the tailpipe emissions. We're not counting the roads or the factories that build the cars or whatever. So the comparable number for cars versus livestock would be 5% of emissions for livestock and 14% for global transport. So again, you see the discrepancy.
Well, it's chalk and cheese.
It's total chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
And the other way that the emissions for livestock are exaggerated is because of the metrics. And I don't want to go into the technical names for the metrics or whatever, but the metric that has been used has been acknowledged as exaggerating the warming impact of livestock by 3 to 4 times and understating the warming impact of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels by another 4 to 5 times. So again, you've got this massive expanse, the difference. What it really means is that, yes, all sectors need to reduce their emissions, and we should be looking at that for livestock. Yes, of course, but it's not going to move the needle on emissions. It's not going to stop global warming. And the leading thinker on this in this country, Professor Miles Allen, has said that if we don't stop warming from fossil fuels, pretty much nothing else matters. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, this is where it all gets very murky. and the messaging falls down because I've had friends who are vegetarian and vegans and all they're eating is crisps and cakes and biscuits and
Right.
those energy
Toast is a big
bars.
one. I understand toast, lots of buttered toast. Yeah.
Yeah, toast and heating plates of pasta and
Yeah.
as Prof Noakes and Ben Bickman said, the bill
Yeah.
comes due as you get older. But I just I just want you to tell us more about the role of regenerative farming in drawing down the carbon that
Yeah.
since the industrial age, we've got a melting planet. We all have to address that. So, I mean, ruminants are the way forward.
They are. They are. So, and there are plenty of people, whether it be, soil for climate, they activate on this basis, or individual farmers like Gabe Brown, who've proved that it can happen. They have proved that the well managed cattle on grassland can help draw carbon from the sky through the process of photosynthesis that goes into the plants. The carbon is taken down into the ground through the root exudates, which you can think of as little liquid pathways into the ground. And there is something which is called the plant microbe bridge, which is formed underground, where the carbon that's going in and the liquid carbon pathway is doing good for the microbes, and the microbes in turn are doing good things for the plants, and they're providing a more nutrient dense environment. So where do cows come into this? Why do they help? They help because the very action of eating the above ground plants to the right level, and that right level, Christine Jones, the soil scientist, says this: get them in the field when when the grass is up to their knees, and take them out when it's down to their ankles. So there's a very precise amount of eating that they need to do, which then encourages that root pathway underground to do its work, and that sets the whole microbial and liquid carbon pathway into process.
And it sustains the biodiversity if you have a
Yeah,
mixed farm like that
it does.
of nature. It's not, I was reading some of the work of the author and environmental activist George Monbiot, and
Oh yeah.
his idea of the future, people are not understanding. It is a repudiation of nature as we know it.
Totally. It's an embracing of technology, of technocrats, of centralization of food systems, of factory made food. It is, to me, it's a dystopian vision, which made me laugh because his book won the George Orwell Prize. And I thought, well, George Orwell predicted a dystopia, and here's the prize being awarded to a man who wants to see this come into fruition.
Well, tell us about what he wants, the hydrogen pathways and, all of these vertical farms that aren't going to have anything to do with what we think of with butterflies and small animals running around happily in rewilded fields. I mean, that's not his vision.
No, and I can't pretend to understand his vision. I couldn't describe it to you properly, but except that the latest version of it is that we're going to create all the necessary nutrients from bacteria in factories. So I don't think he talks so much about this cell-based meat so much as that new bacteria kind of source. Now, it may or may not come to fruition even on a small scale. I have no idea. I do know that the cell-based meat idea is not going so swimmingly well, however, and that the predicted scalability of cell-based meat, which Monbiot did advocate for at one point, um, is the scalability is a really, really big problem. Not only that, but that cell-based meat continues to require the bovine serum, so that's a kind of ethical issue to deal with. It would continue to require the growing of great swathes of soy to provide the amino acids that go into the cells. So it's not like we get rid of industrial agriculture by having cell-based meat factories.
And as Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf said in their film Sacred Cow, I mean, soya, the production of the monocrop of soy, is a horror story for nature and biodiversity.
That's, you couldn't put it better than that. That's exactly right. Yeah. So anything that I think moves us away from nature, from the ecosystem, the wholeness of ecosystems, a fully functioning ecosystem, I think has the danger of coming a cropper and causing more harm than good. So for me, looking at the evidence, whether that be single farm evidence or any of the meta analyses of across multiple farms, the evidence suggests that our best hope for drawing down carbon is to implement these regenerative practices, proper managed grazing, cover cropping, silvopasture, which is mixing the animals in with the trees, um, and just generally changing the way we conduct agriculture back to the old mixed farming kind of method. Now, a lot of people say this is a pipe dream because we've gone too far towards the industrialized model. I don't think it's a pipe dream. I think there are plenty of farmers working on that right now, and I attended something called Groundswell, which is a regenerative agricultural festival in June. Thousands of farmers were there, and they're all trying this to one degree or another, or thinking about trying this, and they are all, some of them are having spectacular results. And when you say, how are we going to make this happen when the government isn't really supporting it? I think it's through people like that. We're going to have this generation of farmers who make it happen despite what the government and what the media do or say.
And Bill Gates. Bill Gates is buying up all the farms in the United States with good intentions. Like, why isn't he more aware of the nuances that you've presented?
I
And
have no
Richard
idea.
Branson, I don't really get his position that we're going to go eat Lancet and we're going to go. I mean, I want to talk more to you about cell culture because I just don't understand why he's not digging deeper into it and is just thinking the way to feed 8 billion people is monocrops and no
Yeah,
biodiversity and having birds in the fields and rodents and gophers. You gave some numbers about how many animals that are not in hierarchical terms deemed to be worth saving are fodder for some of these monocrops, the plant
that's
crops.
right. They're killed in the course of growing those monocrops. Bird species in this country have declined by 57% since the 1950s when we introduced really that method of farming. So, in answer to your question about Bill Gates, I can't get into his head. I don't know, and I don't think many people do know what his intentions are. I do know that his recent book, How to Save the Planet, I think it's called, was a travesty. And it did not dig deep, even in book format. There were no good ideas, no new ideas. And he was really advocating for more use of chemical fertilizers. Well, we know that that has destroyed soil. We know that something like 84% of the topsoil in this country has been destroyed. And we need to stop that, halt that process, and rebuild it. And he's providing absolutely no mechanism to that. My theory about him is that he is a natural born technocrat and he believes in technical solutions. His history is the software industry and that he built up Microsoft and the whole company. He thinks that way. He thinks in technocrat terms. And he probably just cannot relate to the idea that we may need to go backwards in time towards old-fashioned farming methods and that might save us.
Well, it's like Rethink X. I mean, is he on board with all of that? I mean, it was astonishing sci-fi fact that you put
Yeah,
in the book about what are they promoting? They're promoting everything done according to data sets and software,
yeah.
artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then voila, some food fakery will happen, and everyone will be happy and smiling, and their tummies will be full.
And this will be by 2030, apparently, according to Rethink X. That was their original prediction.
So
And
tomorrow, it'll all happen by tomorrow.
practically tomorrow. And the whole of the meat and dairy industry will be dead and eradicated. So, I mean, I really don't put much stock in Rethink X. I think that their predictions are ridiculous, frankly.
But Eat Lancet is
Hmm.
holding sway.
Yeah.
World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and all of the titans of the capitalist system as we know it.
Yeah.
And I'm not one to go, oh, they're all doing this deliberately to, it was, with COVID getting the chips in our heads. I'm not going down that route, but I am incredibly suspicious because it seems to be, as I said earlier, just a wholesale repudiation of nature as we know it. We want the flowers in the fields. We want biodiversity, surely. You put it beautifully, and you can maybe tell us about this farm, Smiling Farm, is it?
Smiling Tree
Where
Farm.
yeah,
Mm.
tell us that wonderful the line that you included in the book. It's about the
Oh
worms.
yes, and it's Christine. It wasn't actually Smiling Tree Farm. I think it was Joel Salatin actually, who has a similar farm. He's just a sort of hero with the farming community in the United States, and he talked about turning this incredible bare patch of dry soil, which he inherited, um, where he could hardly produce anything at all. He turned it into this very rich environment, super diverse environment, where literally the chickens that he raises follow the cows and eat the insects that attach to the dung that the cows are leaving. That's the way the whole thing works. It's
Oh, I
very
love that. And
diverse.
he's got sort of chicken mobiles. He
Chicken
takes them out
mobile.
of the,
He
the
takes them,
pens.
follows the cows. And he said, this was dead land, but now I walk out and you can hear the earthworms moving. And it sent tingles down my spine. And if anybody wants to look up Joel Salatin on YouTube, listen to his videos, it's just truly inspirational. It really is.
Joel, Salatin.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
Gabe Brown is the same. He does videos as well. And he has discovered he has increased the carbon in his soil um, to depths which massively outweigh any of his neighbors who aren't using his methods. So it's
Yeah.
all there. It's all
Because
there.
I think then you've hit it on the head with Bill Gates being a technocrat.
Mhm.
I think that's probably what's driving him because we know with malaria and the Gates Foundation and he's done such worthy work in other areas, all
Yeah.
for the betterment of the poor, the rich, the masses in the middle. You know, and speaking of that, I wanted to pick up the cell cultivated meat
Hmm.
topic because with animal welfare, surely this is the answer. If we can make it scalable, if we can make it so it's not too creepy and it's not involving, fetal bovine serum being, I don't know, extricated, however they would do it, if it's not involving all kinds of isolates and fakery in the elixir to grow the muscle, because Ben Bickman said it's an incredibly heavy thing. But, in 20 years, this might be the answer to delivering protein to the masses if we can crack it and make it palatable to the masses, as
Yeah.
opposed to murdering animals in feedlots.
Yeah. If, and I think this is the problem. We don't know if it can be scaled. We don't know if it can be scaled economically so that it's affordable. We don't know if it can actually replicate the nutrient density. And this, for me, is one of the biggest issues as well. There are many other issues, but this is one of the bigger ones because they rarely talk about the nutrient equivalents of these products. They might talk about we can get the same amount of protein, but all proteins aren't the same. And can you actually just inject amino acids and have them perform in that meat and then in the body in the same way? I remain skeptical about that. But
Yeah,
let's say they managed. Let's say that they manage I think it'll be more like 30 years before we get it to our plates in any kind of affordable form. But if they do manage, we still have a problem. We have a problem in that animals are going to be dying for the monocrops that go into feeding these cells.
and we can't say that's accidental anymore, can we?
No, we
It's a
know it happens.
deliberate byproduct. I mean, we know that countless thousands of gophers and birds and rats and all kinds of things are dying to provide
Absolutely.
soya.
Yeah. And then we have the problem of the soil. So if we really know about the impacts that ruminants have on the soil, we would have a problem if we remove them all. and we would have very, very poor soil health, and therefore growing of crops would be difficult, and you'd have all these erosion problems and flooding problems and everything that goes along with that. So now the answer that many people, vegans, give is, okay, well, let's have the ruminants on the land, but let's not eat them. And in a way, this was the proposition put forward by the movie Kiss the Ground, which I don't know if you've managed to see it, but it was made by vegan activists, that movie, and it was narrated by Woody Harrelson, who's a long-term vegan.
Yeah, I did love the movie though. There were
It
some
was a
great
beautiful
points in it.
movie, beautiful movie. But if you talk to some of the farmers in that movie, they will tell you, and they told me, that there was a very deliberate backing away from the idea that actually the cows must then go on to be food. That part of the equation was not registered in that movie. Now, you have to think about economically, how would that work? How would we support ruminants on the land that then have no economic value to the farmer? Who's going to pay for that?
And also,
The
there would have
government
to
would
be an
pay for
eventual
that.
cull. There would have to be a
It would
cull
have to be
because
a
we'd be
cull.
overrun with livestock.
That's exactly right. There would be a cull. So, in what way is a cull a different thing than a slaughter for food? It's not really, is it? I think the best, I would say this is my perspective, that the best way to honor the animal is to treat it well and to take advantage of the role it plays in the ecosystem, and also to take advantage and to honor what it does for our health and the role it plays in human health. That's what animals in the wild do to each other. And we just have to get it into our heads that we are not that different. We have biological needs. They are set. We can't change the way our bodies function. And we need to adopt that mentality of viewing this as a circle of life and something necessary, but at the same time, something that we need to do respectfully and thoughtfully, very thoughtfully.
Well, I guess too, patented cultured cow cells, they're not going to draw down carbon, sequester it in the ground. So we need to be looking more holistically. I mean, I hate to use that term, Mother Nature. I mean,
Does Mother Nature know best? Probably.
exactly. I mean, this is what's galling when you start to read about vertical greenhouses on concrete slabs,
Mm.
covered in, I don't know, is it plastic? What are they covered in?
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, we cannot ruin the countryside to accommodate these wackadoodle ideas, hydrogen pathways and everything.
Yeah, and those greenhouses so far can only grow things like herbs and lettuce. Let's face it, they're not going to grow everything we need. They're not going to grow all the nuts and the avocados and the multiple varieties of vegetables that we need. So I think work with nature rather than try and defy it. But you're right; it's a message that is hard to put out there, because there are quite a lot of takers for the George Monbiot vision, which is the technocrat vision. There are quite a lot of people who think that is the best way to go.
I'm so distrustful. I mean, we know what the capitalist system does to
Yeah.
humans, especially the humans who are at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and just struggling
Yeah.
along. For the impoverished people, which is most people in the world, how are they going to be assured that they will have the food that they need to not even just not thrive, just survive? I mean,
That's
can
right.
we trust the titans of industry as we see and know them now to be delivering this to the masses, especially the poor of the world?
And I would just ask people to look, if they get the chance, at the companies that are partaking in the what's called the Fresh Initiative, FRESH, but it's got capitals all over the place. It's quite complicated the way they spell it. And it's affiliated with the Eat Lancet Commission and their whole planetary health diet. And if you look at that list of corporations, it is all the big chemical ag companies, all the big processed food companies, all of the people who stand to gain from this sort of almost fake plant-based future where we pretend to have animal foods, we make them out of plants, or we even the cell ag solution will be in there. So it's no secret what's going on here. It's very obvious to see that these corporations have hitched themselves to this kind of philosophy because it's going to be the best way for them to make profit and to survive. It's also no secret to understand what the WEF, the World Economic Forum, headed up by Klaus Schwab, which you mentioned, it's no secret what they're doing. It's about central control. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is actually on their website, and it's actually admitted to by Klaus Schwab regularly in interviews. He talks about owning the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right?
I saw that a couple of days ago. It was all over Twitter.
So,
but I think that, you know, I don't mean to say that they're being malicious in this. I really don't think so. I think they really have looked at everything, and Bill Gates and even Richard Branson, who's taken meat off the menu, and yet, oh, come fly with Virgin 15 times a month.
yeah.
You know, I just, there's so much hypocrisy involved in this whole thing. And, you know, sorry, I just hit my mic. Far be it from me to attach maliciousness to the mindset and the outlook of Klaus Schwab and all kinds of people who I think most of them think they have found the way forward.
Exactly. You don't need to imagine that they're malicious to be wary of it, right? It can still be, it can have a negative impact without them intending to or being malicious. So I agree with you. We don't need to infer that. I just think that people need to be aware that that is one of the risks, the over centralization, the over commodification, and the profitization of our food system in a way that is detrimental to human health. I mean, if you look at human health around the world right now, we have 2 billion people who suffer from nutrient deficiencies of one kind or another. 2 billion. So that's almost a third of the population. Of those, there are 2 billion that suffer from anemia, of which 40% are children. Another 40% are, 40% of children suffer that, and 40% of pregnant women. Zinc deficiency is very widespread as well. Vitamin A deficiency affects some 25% of people in some countries. So we have a very real problem, which is not feeding the world in terms of calories. It is feeding people, feeding the world the right nutrients. And I just cannot see how we're going to do that, how we're going to fix that problem if we're taking away all of the foods that provide those very nutrients.
But I also think, as a companion to that, so if we're taking that away, I also think more focus and attention and, yes, government money, because we need that catalyzing communion of action and money from government. We could look at making supplements more bioavailable. If most of the population is going to subsist on rice and beans and mountains of lentils and not get the amino acids that they need because they really won't eat animal products and they don't want to, then can we not put some money and some scientific attention toward making all of the minerals and supplements more bioavailable for all of the people who need them, the 2 million with anemia?
Yeah, and there should be. I imagine that there are people who are working on that, and perhaps it's a very difficult thing to do, which is to make them bioavailable, because as we know, they all operate very differently in the body than vitamins in the food matrix, and it's a very complicated set of interactions that go on when you eat food, isn't it? Between all of the minuscule nutrients in that particular food acting together. Yeah. It's hard to replicate.
Yeah, the orchestra of our biochemistry is
That's right.
Pretty amazing ensemble, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Jayne,
right.
Final question, because this is, I don't know how long we've been talking, but the title of your book, of course, is provocative. And you you did that deliberately. Did you have a struggle with the publisher saying, because I mean, confidence trick,
Yeah.
swindle, deception, deliberate deception. Now, we've gone into some of the layers and the drivers behind that, but if you had just a few short sentences to sum up the con that is being perpetrated on the general public all around the world, with plants based only is better for the climate, better for your health, what would that be?
Yeah, the con is not a confidence trick, and I do state that in the book very clearly. It's not somebody pulling strings at the center and swindling us. The con, as I think of it, is literally the gradual conditioning of our thought by a whole constellation of interests acting independently sometimes and acting together other times, in whose interest it is to persuade us that the plant-based diet is better for health and better for the environment. So that conditioning has been so effective that now there's even fear about going against it and talking about it. And that's what I've learned in the process of publishing this book, that some people are still afraid to even talk about the fact that that's happening. The consensus, because the other word which is connected with conditioning is consensus. And we have to understand that the root word of consensus is con too. So there's good and bad when you get a consensus. And I think in this case, we have a global consensus in favor of plant-based diets, which is detrimental.
I just want to point out too, Jayne, you mentioned something at the outset that I mean everybody needs to read your book because you do put so much in there. Yes, you're an omnivore. I've come back to eating meat as well after some health struggles at midlife, the big middle years. But your book is not widely available. My biggest share of the audience is in the United States. What's happening with your book there?
Well, due to the vagaries of publishing internationally, which I can't explain, only the audio version and the digital version is currently available from Amazon.com in the States. The hardback version will be available in January of 2023. So that's a good 5, 6 months away. But if somebody wants to get it ahead of that time, they can order from Amazon.co.uk and pay extra for shipping if they really want it in a hurry.
And I'm not going to flannel you again, but it is essential reading. It is fantastic. I have learned so much, and yeah, I mean, 522 pages, all kinds of, I think 20 of those pages are citations and footnotes. And I mean, you have done this in forensic detail, and you've provided the balance that I was missing as one of the confused and conflicted, your audience of the confused middle, because it's definitely helped me see things. And I will never, I don't think I'll buy avocado, not avocado, but almonds anymore, you know.
Right.
But, just the connections you made, we didn't get into it as well. Some of my preferred media sources, BBC, my alma mater, and The Guardian, Channel 4. I just cannot believe that you've got vegan interest behind some
Mm-hmm.
of their program sponsorship. I mean, we need to get the regenerative farming, mixed small farming message out there. And, I can just say, let's do a documentary. If somebody can stump up the money, I've got loads of experience in making TV docs. Let's get the other side of that message out without being, one-sided. Really look at the issues that you're raising in your
I
book.
may take you up on that because I have somebody I know who's a filmmaker who is interested in potentially doing a documentary based on the different chapters in the book. So we'll talk, Susan.
Yeah, it's got to have some
Yeah.
editorial balance, and the
Yeah.
facts need to be balanced because right now, the plant-based message is the only one we're hearing. And
Mhm.
everyone I talk to is embarrassed if they actually say that they eat a morsel of meat. Oh, well, I'm
Yeah.
mostly vegan. That's the answer. Back to that actor again.
I would just
Mostly
ask,
vegan.
my final plea really is that if people read this book, talk about it to people, spread the word, change that balance in the narrative. If somebody says to you at lunch or dinner or whenever you meet people, well, of course, eating plant-based is best. If we can all have a little bit of bravery to challenge that with a fact or two plucked from the book or from somewhere else, if you find it, I think that is the only way we're going to change this.
Well, I've already bought one of your books to hand out as a gift, and I'm going to be buying a lot more to share around because everyone's confused. We feel guilty about eating anything these days. There's always, oh, the ice cream will have palm oil in it and it'll send your sugar
Right.
skyrocketing, and, you know, a summertime staple. And don't eat the watermelon because that's got too much fructose in it. And, you know, we just need to live and find joy in our lives and be eating
Healthy.
in a healthful way, and real food. So anyway, blah blah blah. We could go on forever. So I want to thank you, Jayne Buxton. Your book is The Great Plant-Based Con, and I can't thank you enough for bringing to light, you know, why eating only plants is not as healthy for us as we're constantly being told it is, and for the planet as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks very much.
And thanks to you for listening and loving the big middle. Get those reviews in. Thank you so much. I got a wedge of them this week. Thank you for putting them on Apple Podcast. And your emails, I don't do that thing where I read them out, but I read every single one of them. And thank you so much for loving the big middle. And I'm slowly migrating over all the audio episodes to YouTube when I find the time. But I'm also moving to France and selling up in London, so things are a bit bouncy. So I just want to give you a bit of a warning that output for the big middle, for me as an orchestra of just one, is going to be a little bit patchy as we go. So anyway, with that, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you find this as fascinating as I did. And again, not another plug for your book. It is very much required reading for anyone who eats food in this current climate. Thanks a lot, Jayne. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.